Spirits might look small, fragile, even insignificant, but their impact on Clash Royale history? Monumental. They've sparked revolutions, suffered devastating falls, and clawed their way back from obscurity. The heal spell collapsed into disaster, only to rise again through the power of a spirit. Fire spirits evolved from an explosive trio to one fearless lone wolf, and the nature spirit, there's more behind its creation than anyone knew. Until today. This is the insane story of every single spirit, and how these tiny rebels didn't just break the rules, they changed the game forever. Back in early 2016, Clash Royale was still fresh out of the oven, and you could feel it in the gameplay. Things moved slowly, the pace was clunky, methodical, and reactive. Decks revolved around big pushes, heavy tanks, and textbook counters. There weren't many opportunities for quick, clever plays or fast-paced outcycling. Why? Because the game barely had any cheap cards. If you wanted something low cost, your only real option was skeletons. Just one elixir for a tiny squad of 4 little bones, and that was it. But make no mistake, skeletons were more than just cheap throwaways. They were the pioneer of cycle decks, the only card that let you rotate faster, kite troops, or throw off a push without sacrificing tempo. Every time you saw someone sneak in a hog rider while you were still trying to cycle your cannon, you could thank, or I guess blame, skeletons for that. Still, skeletons couldn't carry the entire early cycle meta on their own. The lack of other low-cost cards meant players were largely stuck playing reactively, waiting for 10 elixir and investing in giant pushes. Without cheap distractions or utility cards to fill those gaps, matchups often felt like a back and forth of slow-motion haymakers. Clash Royale was fun, sure, but it hadn't hit its stride just yet. Then on May 5th, 2016, Supercell dropped something completely new. The Fire Spirits. And while they were technically a troop, they didn't act anything like we'd seen before. They didn't walk toward the enemy slowly, they didn't trade hits back and forth, they didn't even stay on the field. Fire Spirits were all about that one moment of impact. They launched themselves forward, exploded on contact, and disappeared. It was like Supercell had created a mini spell on legs. No other card really behaved like this. Not quite a spell, not quite a troop. Spirits were their own thing entirely. And even now, players still debate whether they deserve their own categories separate from troops, spells, and buildings. But weird as they were, Fire Spirits brought an important new tool to the arena. They came in a group of 3, costing 2 elixir in total, and each one dealt area splash damage on contact. They were basically a living, walking burst of fireball light damage. This let them destroy low-health swarms like minions, goblins, or even a princess hiding in the back. Things that Zap alone couldn't reliably handle at that time. However, this value came with a risk. Fire Spirits were fragile, and when I say fragile, I mean extremely fragile. Unlike Zap, which was instant and guaranteed to land, Fire Spirits had to physically travel to their target. This meant that they could be distracted, kited, or even killed before exploding. A quick log or ice spirit could throw them completely off. If your fire spirits didn't land, you lost 2 elixir and got nothing in return. So while their upside was massive, their downside was just as punishing. Not long after the fire spirits launched, Furnace joined the party. But before we talk about that, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this content. That's all. Thanks. Furnace wasn't like Cannon or Bomb Tower, it didn't shoot or defend. Instead, it spawned fire spirits in waves, sending out a pair every few seconds, and this simple mechanic completely changed how people thought about chip damage and tempo control. Suddenly, fire spirits weren't just a one-time investment. Furnace made them relentless. If you ignored it, it would keep launching fire spirits at your tower until you were forced to respond. It created constant pressure without committing any actual troops to the field, and in a game where cycling was still underdeveloped, that was a big deal. Furnace didn't just support existing strategies, it created new ones. One of the most iconic and most hated pairings in early Clash Royale was Furnace plus Royal Giant. Here's how it went. You'd drop a Furnace in the back and just let it chip away. Every few seconds, a pair of fire spirits would walk down the lane. Your opponent would either spend elixir to counter them, or take the chip damage. Nothing flashy, nothing aggressive, just constant pressure. And once they were tired of dealing with that cycle, boom, Royal Giant at the bridge. But this wasn't the old clunky Royal Giant. Around this time, Royal Giant had gotten a massive range buff, which suddenly turned him from one of the worst cards in the game into a tower sniping beast. Now your opponent wasn't just dealing with a Royal Giant safely sniping their tower from the bridge, they also had fire spirits jumping in behind him every few seconds. You couldn't swarm him, you couldn't kite him, you couldn't stack glass cannon troops behind the tower. The splash damage cleared everything. It was brutal. This combo didn't just win games, it exhausted players. It was simple, efficient, and completely demoralizing to face. No wonder it became one of the most infamous ladder strategies of the time. 2 months after Fire Spirits, July 2016 introduced one of the most pivotal cards Clash Royale would ever see, the Ice Spirit. Now, this wasn't a trio, this was just one tiny spirit, costing 1 elixir. But don't let that cost fool you, this card changed everything. So the Ice Spirit jumped onto enemy troops or buildings and froze them for 2 seconds, and early on, that freeze was crazy strong. It could stop an entire push in its tracks, letting your tower shred through support troops or completely resetting a charge. But here's what really made it dangerous. It was durable. Unlike Fire Spirits, who died to, well, basically everything, the Ice Spirit could tank 2 Princess Tower shots and still get its freeze off. It could even survive a zap and keep moving. That made it way more reliable, especially for players who wanted consistency and high-pressure scenarios. And beyond just being a stalling tool, it had amazing synergy with spells like Zap. Together, Ice Spirit plus Zap could take out minions, goblins, or princess, while also freezing anything left standing. It became a staple in Hog Cycle decks, especially the now infamous 2.6 Hog Cycle, a deck that relied entirely on fast rotations and cheap value. Before Ice Spirit, Skeletons were the only 1 elixir card. That was it. Now, for the first time since launch, players had a second ultra-cheap option to cycle, defend, and stall, as well as enable faster gameplay. This wasn't just another card. It was the beginning of a new tempo for Clash Royale. Spirits introduced a brand new tactical layer to Clash Royale. They weren't your average troops. They didn't linger, they didn't tank, they didn't fit into the old mold. But they did change the flow of battle. They rewarded timing, prediction, and understanding matchups. And in a meta that had once revolved around slow tanks and heavy counters, Spirits gave players the tools to play smarter, faster, and more creatively. With just 2 cards, Fire Spirits and Ice Spirit, Supercell cracked open the door to what Clash Royale would eventually become: a fast-paced, skillful, constantly evolving battlefield where every elixir counts. And while only Skeletons and Ice Spirit held the 1 elixir title in 2016, they planted the seeds for the cycle-heavy high IQ gameplay that defines the game today. Because later on, this gets crazy, especially with champions and evolutions added into the mix. The year 2017 marked a pivotal chapter for Clash Royale's Spirits, 2 tiny cards that shaped the meta in very different ways. At the start of the year, January was pretty brutal for the Fire Spirits. Their usage was nearly non-existent as players experimented with other options, and the card kinda fell out of place in the evolving meta. Meanwhile, the Ice Spirit quietly carved out a niche for itself as the perfect 1 elixir tool for the newly emerging Logbait archetype. This deck thrived on overwhelming opponents with multiple small, fragile troops, forcing them to waste their spells. Ice Spirit's ability to freeze enemy troops and towers gave Goblin Barrels and other units crucial extra seconds to dish out damage, making it a key piece in baiting out spells and stalling pushes. Then, in February, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Then, in February, everything changed for Fire Spirits. A major nerf to the Zap spell, which had been their greatest counter, dramatically shifted the meta. Before the nerf, Zap could instantly wipe out Fire Spirits, rendering them almost useless, but after Zap was weakened, Fire Spirits suddenly found more room to survive and make an impact. Their usage skyrocketed, jumping to over 20% in top decks. They became a staple of the spell-bait meta, showing up not only in bait decks but also in siege decks like Expo and Royal Giant, as well as in popular Hog Rider builds. For a brief, shining moment, Fire Spirits looked poised to become one of the game's defining cheap splash troops, bringing explosive area damage and relentless pressure. Their ability to punish swarms and support heavy siege units made them invaluable in this meta. Meanwhile, Ice Spirit's influence steadily grew. Known for its reliability and utility, it became a favorite among cycle players who needed a consistent 1 elixir card to stall, freeze charges like Battle Ram, and help control the flow of the game. When skeletons were nerfed in June, Ice Spirit's rise accelerated even further. Previously, skeletons had been the dominant cheap cycle option, but as they weakened, Ice Spirit became the go-to choice for fast cycling, freeze utility, and supporting multiple deck archetypes. Fast forward to April 2017, and we see the introduction of the Heal spell, a 3 Elixir card. You might wonder why a 3 Elixir spell is relevant here, or even why the Heal spell existed at all since it's not a spirit. Well, keep watching to find out how this spell turned into a spirit. As for 2017, it really didn't get much use in most decks, as players struggled to find situations where it shined, but there was one major exception: the 3 Musketeers. When Fireball hit the 3 Musketeers, it often left them with just a sliver of health, barely alive but vulnerable. The Heal spell could nearly instantly restore all of that lost health, bringing the 3 Musketeers back to full strength. This gave players who used this combo a massive advantage. While the Heal spell was weak or even often useless in most matchups, in this specific scenario, it felt unbalanced and frustrating to face. A card that was otherwise overlooked suddenly had the power to completely turn the tide of battle. The summer month saw the Ice Spirit cement its position as a top-tier card. Even with buffs to bats in August, Ice Spirit remained a solid counter, often taking out multiple bats for less elixir cost, further justifying its place in top decks. By late summer, Ice Spirit was found in 4 of the 5 most popular finishing decks of the month, becoming practically a must-have for any cycle-heavy player aiming for ladder success. Fire Spirits, however, began to fade. By May, many of the decks that briefly championed them abandoned the card, experimenting with other options as the meta evolved once again. Even the Expo decks, some of the Fire Spirits' last strongholds, moved away. Although Fire Spirits still had occasional competitive play, they struggled to find a broad niche. Buffing them risked creating an unbalanced Furnace meta, something Supercell was careful to avoid, which kept Fire Spirits in a delicate balance between power and weakness. As the year closed out, Supercell cracked down hard on the dominant Logbait archetype, nerfing 6 of its 8 core cards in December. Despite the sweeping change, Ice Spirit managed to avoid nerfs entirely. It remained one of the most used troop cards on ladder, quietly maintaining its role as a versatile, reliable, and impactful tool. The community barely clamored for an Ice Spirit nerf, likely because its strength was subtle and its usage so widespread that it kinda just felt like a natural part of the game's ecosystem. Fire Spirits, meanwhile, retreated into niche roles, powerful in the right matchups, but rarely the star of the show. That was the Ice Spirit, but for how much longer could it retain the spot of number 1 spirit? The steady march of 2018 began like the previous year, with Ice Spirit firmly entrenched as a staple in cycle decks. Whether it was Logbait, Siege, or Hog Rider archetypes dominating the latter, Ice Spirit thrived due to its unmatched versatility. What other troop could soak up 2 Mega Minion shots for a positive elixir trade, clear clumps of bats and skeletons, and reset the charge of key units like Battle Ram or Prince? Ice Spirit could do all that and more, which is why it appeared in about 40% of top ladder decks consistently for the first few months. But as with all dominant cards, a reckoning was coming. In April of 2018, Supercell finally stepped in with a direct nerf to Ice Spirit, its first in over a year. The damage was trimmed by 4%, just enough to tweak specific interactions without breaking the card entirely. The biggest impact was a reduction in freeze duration from 1.5 seconds down to just 1 second, cutting its signature stun effect by a third. This was a heavy blow for a card so beloved by players. The community pushback was pretty fierce, especially for mid-ladder players who didn't feel Ice Spirit was overpowered in their experience. Still, the nerf was justified at the highest levels of play, where Ice Spirit had been dominating. This nerf set off a subtle domino effect in the meta. With Ice Spirit less able to lock down enemy pushes, balloon decks gained some more breathing room. Previously, combos like Ice Spirit plus Tornado had been the key to controlling Balloon's advance, but with the freeze shortened, Balloon saw a resurgence, eventually contributing to a rise in Mega Minion usage as a counter. Even with the nerf, Ice Spirit remained a solid choice in cycle decks, though its future now felt uncertain. Meanwhile, Fire Spirits were struggling to find their place in 2018. Their usage rate stayed stubbornly low as Supercell patiently observed their unpredictable performance. After over 2 years without a buff, Fire Spirits finally received one in July of 2018, a modest 5% damage increase. This buff allowed them to fully take out a flying machine with one blast, but it still wasn't enough to revive the trio's glory days. The Fire Spirit's problem was deeper than just raw stats. The meta had evolved with several new small spells, including Barbarian Barrel and Snowball, both low-cost, reliable answers to swarm units. These spells severely limited Fire Spirit's niche, as single spirits were easy to kill and couldn't be split to avoid giving spell value like other swarm cards, i.e. skeletons or guards. Additionally, many cards Fire Spirits had once countered for positive trades like Goblin Barrel and Skeleton Army had been nerfed or reworked to lower elixir costs, reducing the value Fire Spirits could gain from their damage. Although Fire Spirits remained decent against Minion Horde, their role was too narrow and too situational. This balancing act was complicated further by the presence of the Furnace. Buffing Fire Spirits risked making Furnace spawner decks oppressive, a scenario Supercell wanted to avoid at all costs. The complexity of balancing both the troop and its spawner kept Fire Spirits trapped in limbo, rarely seeing play outside of niche cycle decks. Meanwhile, the heal spell limped through 2018, mostly unchanged. Although it was an interesting card, it struggled to find widespread use. Minor quality of life tweaks allowed it to be placed over rivers and slightly expanded its radius, but that did little to improve its viability. Most players considered it one of the least used cards in Clash Royale, often predicting its eventual removal. The heal spell's biggest problem was its narrow application. It excelled only in very specific scenarios, like, healing musketeers after a fireball. But this combo was so powerful that the heal spell couldn't be buffed without breaking that interaction, and as a result, it remained a niche, almost forgotten card, widely regarded as one of the most requested cards to be reworked or even removed. 2019 was a turbulent year for the spirits in Clash Royale. It was marked by major changes, tough balancing acts, and the emergence of new challenges that reshaped their roles on the battlefield. The year kicked off with a major rework of the heal spell on January 7th, 2019. Its cost was slashed from 3 elixir down to a mere 1, a bold move aimed at breathing new life into the card. However, to balance this, its healing power was reduced by a whopping 63%, and its duration shortened from 2.5 seconds down to just 2. While many players were excited, and some were worried about the potential new heal-centric meta, the excitement was short-lived. The heal spell found a brief place in the popular 3 Musketeers and Battle Ram decks reminiscent of 2017, but by the end of January, its usage plummeted back to 0, and stayed there for the entirety of 2019. This decline was largely due to the card's reduced healing, which made it ineffective even in its best niche. Developer Seth later explained that balancing the heal spell was an impossible task, because any buff that made it viable with 3 Musketeers made it overpowered, while any nerf made it useless quite literally everywhere else. The card's fate became even more sealed in November of 2019, when Battle Healer was introduced, a new 4 elixir troop capable of healing herself and nearby allies rapidly. The Battle Healer's superior healing made the heal spell feel obsolete overnight, and its usage and win rates dropped to the lowest points in history. Eventually, Supercell made the hard decision to remove the heal spell entirely and replace it with the Heal Spirit. This new 1 elixir spirit functioned similarly to the Ice Spirit, but healed allies on contact rather than freezing enemies. Interestingly, the Heal Spirit had been subtly teased before the heal spell's removal. Players could spot its reflection in the broken glass of the announcement image. When officially released, the Heal Spirit was surprisingly powerful at launch, healing almost twice as much as the old heal spell and fitting well into cycle decks. However, despite its strong healing, it still wasn't quite as versatile on defense as Ice Spirit, whose freeze ability could disrupt enemy targeting and attacks. Fire Spirits, once an explosive threat, faded further into obscurity throughout 2019. Despite their long history, they didn't receive a single balance change all year, and their usage remained stubbornly low. For a brief moment in April and May, Fire Spirits found a small niche in a log bait deck that surged to the top of the leaderboards, even hitting the #1 global spot. This fleeting success showed they hadn't lost all potential, but it wasn't enough to spark a lasting comeback. By October, community manager Seth hinted at possible future changes for Fire Spirits, suggesting a rework focusing on giving them a unique fire mechanic, potentially increasing their splash radius to differentiate them from other spirits and spells. He stressed that this wouldn't necessarily be a buff, but rather a redesign to make their gameplay feel more unique. This comment confirmed that Fire Spirits were still on Supercell's radar, despite their stagnant performance. Fire Spirits remained stuck in a tough spot because their trio format made them vulnerable to spells and easier to counter. Unlike other Swarm cards, they couldn't be split effectively to avoid spells, and the rise of reliable spells like Barbarian Barrel and Snowball squeezed them out of the meta. Their damage was just barely above competitive after the 2018 buff, but wasn't enough to make them a staple in most decks. Ice Spirit entered 2019 performing solidly, but no longer dominating the cycle-heavy meta as it once did. Its usage rates remained healthy, hovering around 45% for much of the year, considered by Supercell as the minimum for a balanced card. However, its win rates lagged behind a bit, signaling that it wasn't as impactful as before. Expo decks continued to carry Ice Spirit's relevance, especially the classic 2.9 cycle variants that had remained popular for years. In August, Ice Spirit saw a small boost in popularity due to the rise of P.E.K.K.A. decks and a nerf to Barbarian Barrel, making Ice Spirit a better choice for some players. Despite these brief boosts, Ice Spirit struggled in the shifting meta, especially as heavy beatdown decks featuring Golem rose to prominence in the later part of the year, an archetype less conducive to cycle cards like Ice Spirit. The introduction of new cards and strategies meant Ice Spirit wasn't quite settling in any single dominant deck type. By the end of 2019, the Spirits had seen their highs and lows. Heal Spell was officially removed, replaced by the more versatile Heal Spirit. Fire Spirits remained stuck in a niche, waiting patiently for the rework hinted at by the devs, and Ice Spirit, while still a solid utility option, was no longer the powerhouse it once was, the role evolving alongside the shifting meta. This year set the stage for future changes and new Spirit designs, hinting at the ongoing importance of these tiny, fast, and tactical cards in Clash Royale's ever-changing battlefield. By 2020, the Spirit family in Clash Royale had already carved out a unique place in the game, each card offering a distinct strategic tool despite their similarities. But this is also the year where we see the Ice Spirit get some real competition for the first time. For the past 4 years, the Ice Spirit was kind of the go-to spirit. Fire Spirits were unreliable and matchup dependent, they were also too Elixir, and the Heal Spirit, way too niche and not nearly as versatile as the Ice Spirit. So, what's the competition, you might ask? Well, in October, we would see the release of the Electro Spirit. The Ice Spirit and the Electro Spirit essentially shared many characteristics, but were tailored subtly for different roles, while the Fire Spirit and Heal Spirit began to find their footing in evolving metas. The Ice Spirit was the classic utility and stalling card. Its hallmark was the freeze effect, freezing enemies for 1.5 seconds, which allowed players to disrupt pushes, reset charges, and delay attacks without heavy Elixir investment. The Ice Spirit's low cost and quick cycle made it a favorite among fast-paced cycle decks, notably the iconic 2.6 Hog cycle. In this deck, the Ice Spirit's ability to freeze key threats like Mini P.E.K.K.A., Inferno Tower, or even support units allowed the Hog Rider to land more hits, making it a cornerstone of offensive pressure and defense. Despite its simplicity, the Ice Spirit was rarely the focus of major balance changes because it filled a niche role so effectively and clearly. And the Electro Spirit, it shared many surface similarities with the Ice Spirit. Both were one Elixir spirits capable of rapid deployment and designed to help control enemy units. However, where the Ice Spirit excelled at stalling and freezing, the Electro Spirit specialized in control through stunning multiple targets and resetting their attacks. Upon deployment, the Electro Spirit would chain a stun effect across up to 9 nearby enemy units, temporarily disabling them and interrupting their attacks or abilities. This made it particularly useful against swarm units that relied on quick attacks, such as bats or skeletons, and also reset charges on units like the Prince or Sparky. While both spirits were staples in cycle decks and control strategies, their differences shaped how players approached various matchups. The Ice Spirit was favored when precise stalling was needed, freezing a single tank or a minion horde, while the Electro Spirit was preferred for broad control and neutralizing groups of smaller units or multiple threats at once. This subtle difference made both spirits valuable in their own right, and sometimes interchangeable depending on the deck's goals. The Heal Spirit was still carving out its role in 2020. It was a response to the Heal spell, which had been a rare and interesting but ultimately problematic spell due to its lasting heal over time effect and general balance difficulties. Unlike the Heal spell, which healed an area over several seconds, the Heal spell was a troop that sacrificed itself to instantly heal nearby friendly units in a small burst. This gave players a dynamic tool to sustain pushes or help fragile units survive crucial moments. Although it was more situational and less flashy than the other spirits, the Heal Spirit found a place in control decks and certain combos, especially those that valued keeping key units alive rather than dealing raw damage. It was particularly synergistic with split or slow push strategies like Three Musketeers, where healing could prolong each lane's presence. Meanwhile, the Fire Spirit in 2020 was still the original trio form, 3 small spirits that jumped towards enemies, exploding on contact. Its role was aggressive damage dealing, focused on countering swarm units and applying cheap chip damage. At a 2 elixir cost, it was less versatile than its 1 elixir spirit cousins, but had the potential for higher burst damage on grounded enemies. However, the trio format sometimes limited its effectiveness. The spirits could be picked off easily or fail to reach targets due to split paths. Fire Spirit was a decent but unremarkable card, often overshadowed by other cycle options, but all of this would change with one major rework coming very soon. 2021 marked the most transformative year for the spirits, largely because of the Fire Spirit rework, arguably one of the most significant single card overhauls in Clash Royale's history. Unless we consider the Goblin Hut, because that one is by far one of my favorite reworks that the dev team has pulled out. Anyway, the original trio was scrapped in favor of one single, more powerful Fire Spirit. The redesign cut the elixir cost down from 2 to 1, but made the Fire Spirit much deadlier. This helped make spirits even more easily interchangeable, as they now all had the same elixir cost and about the same hit points. It really was just preference at this point. Anyway, the new Fire Spirit boasted a 6% damage increase, enough to one-shot lava pups at tournament standard. Its hit points more than doubled, giving it the durability to survive long enough to reach the Princess Tower in many cases. Perhaps most importantly, its jump range increased by half a tile, enabling it to more reliably reach targets like the bowler and other slow-ranged attackers in one-on-one encounters. The explosion radius nearly doubled, rising to 2.5 tiles, which was a massive boost designed to enhance its area damage. These changes made the Fire Spirit a true chip damage powerhouse, able to apply high pressure for only 1 elixir. It found immediate synergy with the Goblin Drill, a card that had also seen popularity and buffs around that time. The Goblin Drill's underground goblins could be supported or paired with Fire Spirit to create fast, relentless pressure. Fire Spirit also began replacing the Ice Spirit in Hog Rider Earthquake decks, valued for its stronger damage output and quicker cycle. However, the rework had an unintended and highly impactful side effect. The large 2.5 tile explosion radius meant that the Fire Spirit could completely counter a center-placed Goblin Barrel for just 1 elixir. Because the Fire Spirit would jump out to 1 goblin and its explosion radius covered the others, it effectively shut down a 3 elixir card with minimal investment. This interaction severely crippled the popular Logbait archetype, which relied heavily on Goblin Barrel to chip damage and bait spells. Logbait players became frustrated as counterplay options against Fire Spirit were limited. Spells like Zap or Snowball no longer took it out effectively, and the Fire Spirit's troop movement meant it could follow barrels anywhere on the field. Recognizing the problem, Supercell nerfed the Fire Spirit in September of 2021 by reducing its explosion radius by 0.2 tiles, making the full counter against Goblin Barrel less guaranteed. Now, to secure a full 3 goblin kill, players needed to nudge the goblins closer together using skeletons or other troops, requiring additional elixir and reducing the Fire Spirit's free counter status. Unfortunately, the Goblin Drill itself was nerfed around the same time, decreasing the Fire Spirit's overall meta presence. Despite these nerfs though, the Fire Spirit remained a popular cycle and chip card, especially in the newly rising Royal Hogs plus Archer Queen deck that dominated after the Champion update. In these decks, Fire Spirit wasn't just defensive, it was a consistent source of chip damage, often outperforming Fireball in tower damage per elixir. The Fire Spirit's jump range was reverted back to 2 tiles in December of 2021, making it easier to be taken out in one-on-one fights and reducing its annoyance factor. The Ice Spirit and Electro Spirit continued their steady roles throughout 2021. The Ice Spirit was a stable cycle and freeze tool in numerous decks, while the Electro Spirit remained valued for its stun control. The Heal Spirit, though less flashy, was starting to carve out a niche in control decks, especially those using heavy or slow units benefiting from its healing burst. So in 2022, the Fire Spirit continued to cement its role as a cheap, high-pressure chip tool. It thrived most notably in Royal Hogs plus Archer Queen decks, which remained top tier throughout much of that year. The Fire Spirit's synergy with this archetype highlighted its dual role, both as a defensive tool and as a source of continuous chip damage. The Fire Spirit's adaptability was also seen in decks featuring the Mighty Miner, which surged in popularity during mid-2022. The Fire Spirit complemented Miner's control style, helping it keep swarms in check and apply pressure without overcommitting Elixir. This versatility reinforced Fire Spirit's position as a valuable utility card rather than a niche option. However, competitive competitive players continued to raise concerns about the Fire Spirit's power, particularly its aggressive chip damage and the lingering Goblin Barrel interaction. In August of 2022, Supercell issued a precise damage nerf, a 9% reduction in damage that dropped it just below the pre-rework Fire Spirit's output. This nerf was designed to keep it viable but curb its dominance. After the nerf, Fire Spirit still one-shot goblins and could counter cards like Zappies, Flying Machine, and Magic Archer, especially when paired with Royal Delivery. But it no longer took out Lava Pups and required 2 other tower hits to kill wall breakers instead of 1. The nerf successfully stabilized Fire Spirit's usage, which fluctuated but never again reached dominant levels. It was regularly featured in decks like Giant Skeleton plus Hog Rider cycle decks, maintaining its place as a reliable chip and pressure card. Meanwhile, the Ice Spirit and Electro Spirit maintained their consistent roles in cycle and control decks, with no major meta shakeups or balance changes. With these 2 spirits, it usually came down to personal preference, and people usually preferred the Ice Spirit. The Heal Spirit continued to serve its healing niche, favored in control and combo decks, but never a dominant force. But keep watching, because this next year would be wild with the introduction of evolutions. By 2023, Fire Spirit's usage rate settled mostly on the lower side compared to other spirits. It remained niche, a valuable card and chip pressure option, but rarely the center of attention. There was a small resurgence in spring of 2023 of the Royal Hogs plus Archer Queen deck, which helped boost the Fire Spirit's usage briefly, but the card largely stayed under the radar. The Ice Spirit kept its steady role as a cheap freeze and distraction tool. Its value in slowing down pushes and enabling fast cycle remained critical in many decks, but it didn't really experience major meta surges or dramatic balance changes. The Electro Spirit quietly held a similar spot as a control card, particularly used in Expo 3.0, as it could more reliably stun Inferno Towers or Inferno Dragons with its chain ability. This chain stun remained valuable in controlling swarms as well, keeping it relevant in the control meta. The heal spell stayed consistent on its role, beloved by players who appreciated its clutch healing effect in crucial moments, but there weren't many who appreciated this healing effect. If you were using a spirit, it would usually be the Ice or Electro Spirit. But this debate wouldn't last long. 2023 was also the year of evolutions, and at the very end of this year, the Ice Spirit received an evolution. It had a 3-card cycle and would freeze and deal damage to a troop 3 times. Unfortunately, during this time though, you had only 1 Evo slot, and it was way better to have an actual win condition like the Royal Giant or Royal Recruits Evolved. But only 1 week after its release, it was already buffed to only require 2 cycles. Still, being able to only have 1 evolution made it so that no one really used it despite its potential. The year 2024 brought renewed interest in the Fire Spirit, largely thanks to a major rework of the Goblin Drill in March. This rework propelled the Goblin Drill back into meta relevance, creating new synergy for the Fire Spirit, which had historically paired well with the drill's aggressive underground pressure. As Goblin Drill climbed in popularity, Fire Spirit's usage rates surged to levels not seen since before its 2021 nerf. It became almost a staple in Goblin Drill decks, valued for its cheap, reliable chip damage and ability to counter swarms, allowing the drill's goblins to do their work more efficiently. This re-established Fire Spirit as a force in the meta, riding the wave of Goblin Drill's success, and outside of the Goblin Drill synergy, Fire Spirit remained somewhat underused, reflecting its status as a specialized card rather than universally dominant. It was a tool often picked for specific deck builds rather than a broadly mandatory choice. The Ice Spirit and Electro Spirit maintained their roles as classic cycle and control cards, but something happened in April of this year. It allowed players to have 2 evolutions in their deck instead of 1. So even though the evolved Ice Spirit had no changes made to it, it was getting evolved in nearly every deck. It was basically a free spell for 1 Elixir that could also deal some good solid damage. The Ice Spirit had become the ultimate spirit. The Heal Spirit, on the other hand, continued its quiet but important support role, assisting control decks and combos, especially those that relied on sustaining slow pushes or split lane strategies. Heading finally into 2025, Fire Spirit largely retained its niche status. While it no longer dominated the meta universally, it was still a competitive pick in specific archetypes, especially new variants of Royal Hogs plus Archer Queen decks and, of course, Goblin Drill builds. Top players experimented with innovative deck lists featuring the Fire Spirit, but it never regained the widespread presence it had in the years immediately following its rework. The Ice Spirit and Heal Spirit quietly persisted as strategic staples. Ice Spirit remained a top-tier cycle and freeze card, integral to many decks thanks to its utility and low cost. Heal Spirit held its place as a clutch healer, valued for the burst healing it offered, to sustain key units, a utility that really never goes out of style in control-oriented decks. One intriguing design note in this era is the Fire Spirit's unique status as the only troop card without a visible model indicator above its head when viewed in the card status screen. While seeming minor, it kind of highlights the card's unusual journey and status among spirits and, well, troops in general. While Clash Royale has already introduced 4 unique spirits, there's still untapped potential for new ones, and 2 of the most requested concepts are the Clone Spirit and the Rage Spirit. Imagine a 1 Elixir clone spirit leaping toward an enemy push or your own troops, and upon contact, duplicating everything in a small radius. Unlike the traditional clone, it could be easier to fit into cycle decks, offering high-risk, high-reward plays for swarm strategies. Of course, its value would be heavily matchup dependent, and it would need careful balancing to avoid becoming a spammable nightmare in decks like Lava Clone or Giant Skeleton Bait. Then there's the idea of a Rage Spirit, essentially a mini lumberjack but without the axe. Upon contact, it could burst and give a short-duration rage effect in a small radius. Not only would that open up some faster offensive timings in cycle decks, but it would also be a natural synergy card with buildings like Furnace, or even with the newly evolved units that benefit from tighter windows of pressure. Both ideas sound insanely fun and dangerously abusable, but with the right tuning, they'd continue the trend of spirits being small cards with massive impact. Just let's not give them evolutions right away. But these are just the concepts made by fans of the game. There's actually one more spirit that has been officially revealed by Supercell already. The Nature Spirit. So the Nature Spirit isn't in the game. Well, I mean, it kind of is, but it was shown in a lore video posted by Clash Royale themselves. The Nature Spirit has the ability to grow flowers and was obsessed with anything related to nature, including, but not limited to, butterflies. You know who else loves butterflies? That is right. You guessed it, the P.E.K.K.A. After being kicked out of the arena, the Nature Spirit found itself surrounded by big pieces of armor. It rested inside of the armor for so long that it fused with it and became the P.E.K.K.A. we all know and love. But while the spirits dominate the 1 Elixir slot, things get way more chaotic once you step into the world of 2 Elixir cards. This is where Clash Royale really starts to break its own rules. These cards are cheap and powerful, just enough to do real damage, but still cheap enough to spam, cycle, or stack. Wall breakers can force tower connections in seconds, Barbarian Barrel deletes Goblet Barrel while giving you a tanky troop, and then there are cards like Ice Calm, which somehow kites, slows, and tanks all for just 2 Elixir. It is that sweet spot where value and versatility collide, and if the 1 Elixir cards were the opening act, the 2 Elixir ones are where the real show begins. How is this even possible? Why are these cards so good? Well, click over to this next video where I break it all down. I'll see you there.